Okay, let's try and unpack this. Imagine a very specific health picture for a moment.
Okay.
Someone is struggling with this awful rattling cough, you know, but they just can't seem to cough anything up.
Right. It's stuck.
Exactly. And on top of that, they're just overwhelmingly sleepy, feel completely wiped out, weak, maybe even breaking out in a cold sweat. And then, strangest thing, this really distinct craving for like cold water or even apples. It's so specific. What substance could possibly connect to that kind of picture?
Well, that combination, it strongly points us toward the symptom picture described for Antimonium tartaricum, often called tartar emetic, at least within a specific framework of understanding symptoms.
Right, exactly. And our source material for this deep dive, well, it isn't some modern medical journal.
Oh, no.
It's excerpts from William Boericke's classic homeopathic Materia Medica. And just for context, a Materia Medica in this tradition, it's basically a detailed catalog, right?
Yeah, essentially a reference book. It lists the symptoms and characteristics observed or linked to different substances when they're prepared and used according to homeopathic principles.
So our mission today is really to dive into this particular text and pull out the essential characteristics and the kinds of situations where Boericke highlights this substance, Antimonium tartaricum, as relevant.
Yeah, what makes it tick, according to him.
We're going to focus on what makes antimonium tart stand out, try to understand its unique signature as it's presented here. The source does note it shares some things with Antimonium crudum, but we're really interested in this one's distinct profile.
Yeah, it's individuality.
It's almost like looking at a blueprint for a specific state of being.
Yeah.
Built from all these detailed observations.
And what's really fascinating about these kinds of texts is how they build that picture. It's not just about the substance itself, but about a symptomatic state. They describe how a substance might sort of manifest in the body and mind, creating this whole landscape of symptoms that, when you see them together, point towards a particular remedy.
And Boericke, he's very clear right from the start about the main clinical focus for antimonium tart, in his view.
Yep.
It's largely confined to respiratory conditions. And he immediately gives us that absolute core guiding symptom, the rattling of mucus with very little expectoration.
Yes. That's the cornerstone, isn't it, for understanding the substance in this context.
Sure.
There's clearly mucus there. You can actually hear it rattling, but the person just lacks the vital strength, maybe, or the ability to bring it up to clear the airways.
Right.
And the text really emphasizes this doesn't usually stand alone. It's most characteristic when you see it alongside a whole group of other symptoms.
Okay, like what?
Things like marked drowsiness, significant diminutivity, which is really just a word for extreme weakness and profuse sweat.
So according to Boericke's text, if you encounter that specific cluster, the audible chest congestion without a productive cough, plus the sleepiness, the weakness, and the sweating,
Yeah,
that's a really strong pointer towards this particular substance.
absolutely. A key signature. But, the text doesn't just stop there with that core picture.
No.
No, it then elaborates on a whole wide range of other accompanying symptoms and conditions where this state might appear. It paints a much, much fuller portrait.
Okay, so it branches out. What else does it cover?
Well, it details symptoms across the whole system, really. Boericke mentions gastric issues, especially in people dealing with, say, alcohol misuse or maybe gout. There's even a mention of severe conditions like cholera morbus. That's an old term for a really serious, rapid form of cholera.
Oh,
And this peculiar sensation described as coldness in the blood vessel.
coldness in the blood vessels. That's unusual.
It is. It also touches on its use, maybe indirectly, in the context of bilharziasis, which is a parasitic infection. And this section specifically details side effects observed after injections were used for that condition. Things like chills, muscle contractions, pain.
That's a very specific clinical observation to include.
It is. And beyond specific conditions, it covers general physical states too. Things like trembling, great prostration, like profound physical collapse.
Like total exhaustion.
Exactly. Faintness, lower back pain, lumbago, and even something as specific as warts on the glans penis. It just shows the sheer breadth of symptoms catalog.
It really does. It's quite comprehensive in its scope.
And then, as you often see in these texts, it organizes other specific details by body system.
Right, like the mind and head section.
Exactly. For instance, it describes a state ranging from vertigo that kind of alternates with drowsiness to great despondency, a fear of being alone, all the way to muttering delirium, and even a stuporous state.
Quite a range.
And there's also that sensation mentioned, feeling like a tight band is compressing the head.
Oh, yeah, that band-like feeling.
Yeah.
That comes up quite a bit in this tradition, doesn't it?
It does. And the description of the face is also quite vivid. Cold, blue, pale, often covered with a cold sweat. And that very specific detail about incessant quivering of the chin and lower jaw.
Wow. Just the chin and lower jaw.
These really granular observations are, well, they're hallmarks of this kind of materia medica.
They really are. What about the tongue?
For the tongue, the appearance is varied, but again, specific. It could be thickly coated, kind of pasty white with red edges. Or red and dry, especially down the center, or even just brown.
And the stomach section, I remember, that had some really memorable specific details. Stuff that helps build that unique picture.
Oh, absolutely. Difficulty swallowing liquids is mentioned.
Right.
But then there's that truly precise observation about vomiting. Vomiting in any position except when lying on the right side.
It's just incredible. So specific.
Isn't it? Nausea, retching, and vomiting are prominent, often accompanied by that deathly faintness and the characteristic prostration we talked about.
And extreme weakness again.
And those cravings you mentioned right at the start.
Yeah, the cold water and apples.
They're listed right here, too. A distinct thirst for cold water, but preferred in small sips, frequently.
Little and often.
Exactly. And a desire for specific foods like apples, other fruits, and generally acidic tastes.
Interesting.
The nausea itself, it says, can even be triggered by fear, starting with the pressure in the chest.
Okay.
Followed by this sequence, including headache, yawning, tearing up lacrimation, and then finally vomiting.
That sequence is fascinating. It's not just isolated symptoms, it's a described progression.
Exactly. It shows a pattern.
Okay, moving on. What about the abdomen?
The abdomen can present with spasmodic cramping pain, often accompanied by a lot of gas or flatus, pressure, especially when bending forward, and diarrhea, sometimes specifically noted alongside skin eruptions.
Okay, and urinary symptoms.
The text describes things like burning sensations during and after urination, painful final drops that might even be bloody, increased urgency to go, inflammation of the bladder and urethra catarrh, narrowing of the urethra or stricture, and inflammation of the testicle or chitis.
Quite a list there too. But let's circle back to what the text really emphasizes as the primary focus.
The respiratory organs.
Yes. This is where that core symptom really lives, isn't it?
Absolutely. Beyond the hoarseness and the great rattling of mucus, with very little expectoration, there's a sensation described as a velvety feeling in the chest.
Velvety.
Yeah. And a burning sensation ascending up to the throat. Breathing is rapid, short, difficult, feeling like they are suffocating, which actually forces the person to sit up.
So they need to be upright to breathe.
Seems so.
Yeah.
Boericke also notes its relevance in the context of chronic lung conditions in the elderly, like emphysema of the aged.
Okay.
And another distinctive observation, coughing immediately followed by gaping or yawning.
Coughing, then yawning. Specific again.
The picture here is really one of the bronchial tubes just being overloaded with mucus. The cough can be triggered by eating, causing pain in the chest and larynx. And in severe cases, the text points towards fluid buildup, edema, and even impending paralysis of the lungs.
Wow. That paints a very serious picture of respiratory distress.
It really does. And accompanying this, you often find cardiac symptoms described.
Such as
Significant palpitation with an uncomfortable hot feeling in the chest. And a pulse that's rapid, weak, and trembling.
Okay.
Dizziness might occur with the cough. And interestingly, difficulty breathing dyspnea that is actually relieved by burping, by eructation.
Relieved by burping. That's another one of those quirky details.
It is. And just like the vomiting being better in a specific position.
Lying on the right side.
Right. The text notes that cough and dyspnea can also be relieved by lying on the right side. It even contrasts this with another substance, Boericke, where the opposite is supposedly true. These positional details, these modalities are clearly considered significant clues in this system.
They really seem to be. Okay, what about the bottom?
The back section also contains some intense specific details. Violent pain in the sacrolumbar region, so the lower back. The text notes that even the slightest effort to move can trigger retching.
Oh, wow.
And that cold, clammy sweat we mentioned earlier.
Back to the sweat.
Yes. And there's another really striking sensation described, a sensation of heavy weight at the coccyx, that's the tailbone dragging downward all the time.
A heavy weight dragging down at the tailbone. Gosh.
It's very specific. Adding to the physical state, there's twitching of muscles and trembling limbs described.
Okay. And the skin?
Skin symptoms can include a pustular eruption like pimples or small blisters filled with pus, which can leave bluish-red marks. Its relevance in smallpox is mentioned, and those warts we talked about earlier.
Right, the warts. Okay. And finally, fever and sleep.
The fever section details phases: coldness, trembling, chilliness, followed by intense heat, and then copious perspiration, including that cold, clammy sweat that's associated with great faintness.
That cold sweat keeps coming back.
It does. It's also mentioned in the context of intermittent fevers, like malaria, perhaps, where there's a noticeable lethargic state. Very tired.
And sleep. Does that reinforce the drowsiness?
Absolutely. The sleep section reinforces that earlier point about the general state. Great drowsiness is called out as a defining characteristic.
Okay.
An almost irresistible urge to sleep, present with nearly all the complaints described. And even mentions sudden electric-like shocks felt when falling asleep.
Electric shocks on falling asleep. Huh.
Yeah.
So when we look at the modalities, the things that make symptoms better or worse according to the source.
Right. The text specifies that symptoms are generally worse in the evening, from lying down at night, from warmth in damp, cold weather, and from consuming sour things and milk.
Okay, so those things aggravate. What makes things better?
Conversely, they're described as better from sitting erect.
Which makes sense with the breathing difficulty.
Exactly. Also better from burping eructation, and notably from expectoration, when the mucus finally is brought up, presumably.
Ah, so relief comes when the core problem is actually addressed, even temporarily.
That seems to be the implication. The text also gives brief notes on relationships with other substances in this system.
Like antidotes or comparisons.
Yeah, it mentions pulsatilla and sapia as potential antidote substances that might counteract its effects, according to this tradition.
Okay.
It also suggests comparing antimonium tart with kali sulf and ipecac, which are other substances with some similar symptom overlaps.
Useful for differentiation.
Right. And finally, it specifies dosage in terms of trituration. That's the process of preparing the substance through dilution and succussion. It notes the second and sixth potencies as relevant, with a caution that lower preparations, the less diluted ones, can sometimes aggravate symptoms, meaning make them temporarily worse before any improvement might be seen.
Wow. Okay. It really is this dense, incredibly detailed description, isn't it? Built up from all these observed effects and correlations over time.
It really paints a very, very particular picture of a state of being. Defined most strongly, I think, by that respiratory struggle, the rattling with ineffective clearing,
Right.
alongside that profound state of weakness, drowsiness, and sweat, but then elaborated with all these other specific, sometimes quite unusual accompanying symptoms.
So just to kind of wrap up this deep dive into Boericke's description of Antimonium tartaricum, the absolute key takeaways highlighted by this text seem to be its strong association with respiratory conditions.
Definitely.
So specifically that distinctive picture. Rattling mucus, very difficult or absent expectoration, coupled with that characteristic general state, the marked drowsiness, profound debility or weakness, and the sweat.
That's the core cluster for sure.
Yeah.
And beyond that, as we've seen, the text provides this wide array of other specific symptoms across different body systems.
Yeah.
From peculiar cravings and sensations to unique physical reactions based on position. It all contributes to the overall very detailed picture of the substance's sphere of action as described in the specific Materia Medica.
So this deep dive, it's really been about trying to understand that incredibly detailed, specific symptom picture presented for antimonium tart within the pages of this particular historical text.
And it really leaves you with something to ponder, doesn't it? Based on this source material.
How so?
Well, consider just how incredibly specific and granular these symptom descriptions are. Things like, the exact side you have to lie on to avoid vomiting.
Right.
Or that sensation of a heavy weight dragging down at the tailbone. What does that level of detail suggest about the approach to understanding ailments being described in this kind of text?
That's a good point.
And maybe more broadly, how might cataloging human experience or even just observing the world around you in such minute ways. How might that change what you notice?
What other unexpected details, maybe in any situation, might hold significant meaning that perhaps you're currently overlooking?
Exactly. Something to think about.